Hello, my name's Kate Mason. I am in the Central Coast, and the Central Coast, the Hunter and Newcastle is currently open for submissions from the public regarding Energy Code declaring this area a renewable energy zone. I have here with me tonight Grant Piper, who is a cattle farmer near Coolah, who had a previous career as an engineer. Grant and his family have a farm on the Great Dividing Range in the Upper Hunter, and it's part of the Orana Central West Renewable Energy Zone region. This was declared a RES in October 2021. Upon uncovering plans for the RES in the farming area, Grant and his wife have been active in their local community. They've formed the Uarbray Tongy Lane Alliance to preserve their valley and village and not to allow the RES development to progress. So thank you so much for your time, Grant, because we're just really in the early stages. Your area is a year ahead of us. Our plans are very vague and we're not sure what it means. Most people don't understand what it's going to mean for this area, whereupon you've been a year of discovering and unpacking what this means for your farming area. And we greatly appreciate your time in having a look at what you found out.
Okay, so we presented this 3 weeks ago in Coolah to a community meeting. We got over 150, 160 people there on the night, which is really good for a small community of something like 1,200 in Coolah and the surrounding districts. And this is the poster and a sign that we've got made up to hang on our fences and try and anyway signify our feelings about everything. We've got about 45 slides, and so after we welcomed everyone, we had the mayor and the deputy mayor came along. They weren't invited, but they came along, and one councillor. It might have been a bit rude not to invite them, but the focus of the meeting was for the community, by the community, and so we didn't invite any of the proponents of the projects or officials. And the fact that they came along, I think, no proponents, but the mayor and deputy mayor, I think shows that they're concerned or they want to know what the community is feeling, and it's a big issue. It's not just something that they're going to deal with before morning tea and then get on to the important stuff. So hopefully it stays in their brain. So we got the presentation, then we went to questions from the floor, and then we got everyone that wanted to make a submission to fill out paperwork or show them how to do it online, so that we could get as many submissions into the proponent as possible on their EISs or their proposals, depending on what stage you're on. And the girls went back into the town the next day and saw people, and that also brought forward a heap more submissions. So that was part of the reason we ended up with like 160 submissions to the Tilt Liverpool Range Wind Farm EIS modification, and that really startled them. And they now have to respond formally to every issue that's been raised. And the ASIN proposal, that's a separate wind farm on the other side of town, we managed to get 114 submissions to that EIS, and over 95% of both lots of submissions were in opposition. And so that's made them sit up, and they now have to answer. The proposals now have to go to the Independent Planning Commission, which is the final step really before they can start building. So that's what you have to do. You've got to get submissions in, you've got to get enough. You've got to get councils to also put submissions in, because if a council opposes, it has to automatically go to the IPC. If they don't get any submissions or any opposition, it may not even go to the IPC. It can just be waved through. So, and on the right of the slide there, we've got one of the advertisements we're putting in the local paper. We've been running ads in the paper every fortnight for the last 6 weeks or so, and the response to that has been really good, because again, people just are unaware of the actual size of these things. They are huge, and you can see there. So we'll keep going. This is the Central West Res. You can see Coolah is in the top right-hand side there, and the two yellow areas either side are the two wind farm proposals that we're up against for Coolah. And just south of Coolah, you'll see Uarbray. It's on the Golden Highway between Newcastle and Dubbo, if you've ever driven that road. And the black snakes you got running out there are the Energy Co power line routes that are proposed. And some of those are 330 kilovolt dual circuit lattice type towers, and some are 500 kilovolt dual towers. And they're basically running from linking up all the projects out to Elong Energy Hub and Rothery Energy Hub, which are massive substations. And then down south, they continue on to Wellington and towards Mumble and Burrendong Dam, where there's already wind farms and solar farms at Wellington.
So they're the
and
yellow.
all along that route, the yellow, all along, they're all wind or solar areas, project areas that are proposed. None of them have been built yet, except around Wellington, there's already some operating. But they want to link all that up and then expand over the whole area. We'll keep going. Some of this info will come out in the next slides. The Australian Energy Market Operator Plan, if you go onto the AEMO plan, you'll see the reses like the Central West Res, New England Res up near Armidale, and the amount of wind and solar icons they've got in there. Then there's other reses out at Hay down south and west of Canberra that they're proposing. And then they've got the two blue bubbles off the coast, which are the maritime reses, or encompass your Central Coast res with the offshore wind turbine proposals. But notice the AMO has no icons in those areas yet. Either it's too far out or it's really still just a thought bubble. There's no real concrete action in those areas, and maybe they don't foresee it actually going ahead. So I'm taking those with a grain of salt at this point. So that's their current map, 2029 to 2030, down the bottom left there. And this is 2049 to 2050. Now look at the icons. So they're selling this to us, the Central West Res, for example, is 3 gigawatt installed capacity, but the AEMO themselves are looking at already expanding it out to something like 12 or 13 gigawatt, and the same in the New England Res. So this is just the beginning. This is just the thin edge of the wedge. But interestingly, again, showing the 2049, 2050, the offshore reses, still no icons there. So advertisers 3 gig, expect 4.4 by 2030 and 7.7 by 2040. And the New England res is 8, growing to 12 or 13. And as I said, this is just the beginning. Once the power line infrastructure is built, the Energy Co infrastructure is built, these areas, I think, will get slowly built out with renewable, so-called renewable projects. It'll change the character of the country in those areas completely. So this is the Tilt Liverpool Range Wind Farm. Coolah's at the top left-hand side there. And there's the modification has 220 6 kilowatt turbines, making 1320 megawatt, increasing from 1,000 megawatt as it was initially proposed. The green is the highway east that joins the Golden Highway back to the Hunter, Newcastle. Tilt is owned by Powering Australian Renewables. I don't know who taught them English, but that's how they name things. It's a partnership between AGL, the Queensland Investment Corporation, and the federal government's Future Fund. So that's a bit of a problem. At least you could say it's Australian owned. However, you've got all these very powerful Australian interests that are, in my view, working against the Australian people almost. And to the west of Coolah, so Coolah's now at the top right of the screen there. To the southwest, we've got the Asen Valley of the Winds wind farm, which is another 148 6 kilowatt turbines, totaling 900 megawatt installed capacity. And where that Girigalang road cluster, under that Girigalang's banner is Tongy Lane. So that's where we live, and that's where we formed our group to fight this the Valley of the Winds proposal initially, and now it's expanded into just trying to stop the rubbish everywhere around town, around us. Who is ACEN? The Ayala Corporation. As much trouble with that as you have with Uarbray. It's wholly owned by a Filipino billionaire, and they have projects all around the world in renewables, and they do all the right things like make donations to the UN and the World Economic Forum and all this sort of stuff if you look on their website. I've spoken to a few people and they're all aware of ACEN, and there's certainly some pretty strong opinions given about what they're like. Trying to match those two maps together, you can see the town of Coolah, a town of less than 1,000 people, is just going to be surrounded by these wind turbines. You know, with the increase in size on the Tilt one, we've gone from seeing, I think, 20 or something, or less, certainly less than 50, to over 140. And around Coolah itself, it's the same. You know, they walk out the front door and they're just going to see turbines on the hills around town. The energy co-transmission lines, the three northern legs are the routes into those wind projects. The southeastern leg is the link into the Walla substation and then back down to the Hunter Liddell power station and into the Hunter network. And then it continues west at Marothery to Eelong, and the Mulberry colour is down to Wellington, Mumble, where it's going to join into that project and new projects in that area. There's also, or there was on previous maps, a New England link, which linked the New England res with the Central West res, and it was coming in from the north near Coolah. The documentation said east of Coolah, and it was terminating somewhere at the end of Tongy Lane. They had it drawn. So it's another thing that, you know, got our interest. And at the last community consultation with them, they said that it is no longer going ahead and they've taken it off all their maps. So it was a 500 kilovolt transmission line, a dual line. Anyway, given their long-term plans and dealing with them is like, I wouldn't be surprised if that reappears some way, you know, down the road. But they just took it off at the moment to try and reduce hassle with the landowners locally. And this is what we're looking at: a 330 double circuit steel tower or a 500 kilovolt double circuit steel tower. And what further complicates this for landholders is they want to put dual power lines on the one easement. So they'll have two of the 500 kilovolt towers within 150 meters of each other because they want redundancy. So you're not just looking at one tower and power line, you've got two. The power lines into the projects themselves, the 330, they're only talking about a single tower line in those cases.
What does redundancy?
Again, they're not small things. Say again.
What does redundancy mean in this context?
Well, if one breaks down or falls over, they've got a second structure right next door that can carry the load. I think this came out of that South Australian incident a few years ago where the link to South Australia broke down. I can't remember what happened, and South Australia lost power that it was getting from Victoria. And so now the AEMO and Transgrid, what they do is they plan dual power lines everywhere. So it's just belt and braces type approach. Talking to New England people, there's up at Walker, they're quite active trying to fight the wind turbines around Walker and elsewhere in New England. And the New England councils have declared that no turbine is to be within 10 kilometres of town. We haven't had that clarified exactly what they class as a town. Is it the Armidale, Tamworth, or is it the small towns? And legally, technically, the councils have no authority to do that, but nevertheless, they've just declared that. So it'll be interesting to see whether they can hold the developers to it, and whether the state government tells them to basically pull their head in and they don't have any authority. The marine wind projects that we talked about before, they're now proposed as well. And the marine turbines, they say, will be 20 kilometres offshore with submarine cables onto land. And we had Mike Young, who's one of the head honchos at DPE and Energy Co at Dunedoo a couple of months ago at an information session. And he near the end of the meeting, he mentioned the offshore turbines and that they'd be 20k, and he said, oh, so they won't have to look at them. So the room was fairly disgusted because there's no, you know, we have to look at them, but if you put them off the coast, they're going to put them 20k off so that the coastal dwellers don't have to look at them. So I think that's fairly inequitable and pretty selfish and arrogant, or whatever else you want to call it. It doesn't sit well with us, because why do we have to look at them? There's no new onshore wind projects in the DPE planning portal since they've announced or floated the marine projects. There's been no new projects listed there, which is interesting. So these might be the last, but that'd be good, but rather they weren't built at all. The other thing is, in their assessment criteria for DPE, there's no cumulative impact. There's no, they assess each project individually, and they don't look at the total impact of all the projects in an area. So again, that's something that needs to change, and it's something to hammer if you're talking or writing to these people. The Federal Environment Minister, Tanya Plibersek, gave a speech in Tasmania recently, and she mentioned the cumulative impact has to be assessed. And so that's something to throw back at them. It is acknowledged, but within the framework of approval, there is no formal process to do that yet. And as we say here, we don't want to be the last onshore wind project that gets built. You know, we'd like that honour to go to someone else. So this is a look out to the east of town, and we've coloured in a couple of the turbines because their montages that they give you are terrible. They always have the wind turbines washed out in white, and they generally have clouds around, and you're really hard to really get a true perspective of their size. And that hill where they're sitting is 800 meters above sea level, and the town, which is to the west, is at about 500 meters above sea level. So that hill is 300 meters high, or about 1,000 foot. And those turbines are 250. So they're almost going to double the height of the hill from town. This is Warung State Forest Road. This is the road up to the Coolah Tops National Park. South of town, this is the Asen wind site. You can see the sort of picture they give you. You can see in the background the turbines. I don't know what sort of camera lens they use, but that's the sort of montage they give you, and that's one of the better ones, as in giving you can see the things. That's looking to the from Leadville, which is south of Coolah, looking east. Sorry. Again, they don't give you very good montages. You see the way the road bends there. They've used sort of a fisheye lens to try and push things away, and that's from Uarbray on the Golden Highway northwest, and that's the Grugalang cluster on the ridge, which is west of our house. We're about 3.5 kilometres west of that, at a similar height to those turbines, looking straight at them.
They have really laboured the cloud point in the backgrounds, don't they? So they blend into the clouds.
Yeah, they do that. All their montages, all their visual stuff it doesn't inform. It just hides, and that's most of their paperwork and most of their documentation does that. It doesn't really inform at all. This is another map, but again, quite complex to read, but all the shadings give you an indication of how many turbines you're going to see from your location. So if you can find your location on this map, which has it's got some dwelling houses on it, but it's quite hard to find. But if you can find your location, if you're in a dark blue area, you'll see from 60 to 101 turbines. If you're in a green area, you'll see 140 to 180 turbines. So you can get a bit of information out of it, but again, it doesn't present all that well. The growth, there is a proposal for a wind farm or a wind project down in Monaro. for 300-metre turbines already. The tilt initial proposal, which is approved, was for 165-metre turbines. They're on the left, and they want to go to 250. And the wind farm that's out at Wellington is 165-metre turbines. So if you want to go for a drive and see what they look like, they're 165. And everywhere else in Australia, they're that or smaller at this stage. Out of the EIS, tilt water use, big thing for us during the drought and things like that, but 621 million litres during construction over about 3 years. They want to get that out of bores, tapping the Oxley Sandsdown Aquifer, and if they can't do that, transported from Windermere Dam, which is about 160 kilometres away, so that would be terribly inefficient. But yeah, I don't know how they're going to, that's a lot of water to get out of the bores as well. We're downstream of where they want to build this. We water our stock from bore water, so it's a concern to us that if we suck that aquifer dry or our bores drop, we could lose access to stock and domestic water. And the breakdown of the use of water is in the table below. But what's interesting is in their initial EIS, their estimate of water use was about 10% of that.
What's
60
what's EIS?
Environmental impact statement. So that's what they will issue first. An environmental impact statement will be issued, and that'll be open for consultation, and you can put in submissions, and then that will be assessed by the department, and then the project will get approved or not approved. Now, the Tilt project has been approved. It was approved in its original form in 2018, and what we commented on is their modification proposal, because they wanted to go to bigger turbines and change the layout slightly, so they put in a modification, and then you get a second chance to comment on the modification. But as I said, 621 million litres, 621 megalitres of water during construction, and that's, you know, 100%, 90. Their original proposal was only 10%. So how could they get their estimation so wrong? And how could the government approve that amount of water and say it's okay, and then treat this as a modification when it's out by an order of magnitude? It's just immense. And there's so many other errors in it as well, or changes. It should really be a new proposal. Once operating, they say 1 million litres per year, and that's going to be sourced from rainwater on site. ACEN has a similar amount of water during construction, so another 600 megalitres of water. Land values for everyone is a big topic. You wouldn't be happy if your house value decreased by 30% overnight, I'm sure. Neither would the people in Palm Beach if they had to look at turbines. But that's what a landowner near a project at Bowman Creek found using the government's own data. There were 2 reports done, preliminary reports they were called, commissioned by the government in 2009 and 2016. They cherry-picked a lot of information. They only assessed houses within 2 kilometres of a turbine, and this fellow just went into them and tore them apart and made his own conclusions. And he, you know, the best he could figure was at least a 30% decrease in value. And some properties were bought by the developers as they were heavily impacted, or they wouldn't sell. There's other questions also of land zoning. Some have said that the land gets rezoned as industrial, not agricultural, and rates and what the rate changes will be, not only for the hosts but for the adjoining landowners. Will our rates increase because they've got turbines on the property next door? So, you know, and as soon as a proposal or the res is announced, effectively, we're in limbo with our land values, because how could you don't know what the effect's going to be, but how could you honestly sell your property knowing that there's going to be turbines on your boundary? You know, and how many buyers is that going to scare off? You know, they're buying, if it's city money and they're buying a country property because they want to get away from the city, they don't want an industrial development on their boundary. So it's going to scare a lot of people off, but they've done a really good job of not quantifying what the land value impacts will be. But it's a big topic, big issue. Noise, they assume a background noise level of 30 dB, which is not very loud, but you know, I walk out on my veranda with my phone with a decibel meter, and like now, and it'll be sitting at 0 and 5 decibels. So they've sort of set a false normal to beat, and it might be okay in town or in a city where you've always got that background noise, but that's not what we have out here. Dwellings are allowed up to 35 decibels, associated dwellings up to 45 decibels. Another 10 decibels is roughly a doubling in noise power. And the 6 kilowatt turbine, the specs on that have 105 decibel sound power level at the turbine. So it's quite a big, quite loud at the turbine when they're operating. And then you've also got the interaction of multiple turbines, how the pressure waves interact and the pulsing, and infrasound, which is low frequency below 20 hertz, which there's quite a bit of research overseas and elsewhere now. And infrasound is interesting in that for a typical house or dwelling, many houses resonate at those low frequencies. So you can actually get an amplification of the noise inside compared over what you might hear outside. So that's where a lot of people near these turbines, you know, they have problems sleeping or what have you, because it's quieter at night, they're in bed, they're relaxed, but the noise is actually seems louder inside because of this resonance. We paid to have 2 independent peer reviews done of the ASIN noise report from the EIS, and both of them concluded that all the contours on their noise map should be increased 5 to 10 decibels. There's flaws in their methodology, and again, everything is biased their way. So this is a noise map for the ASIN project. They issue something like this. The little triangles are the turbines, and then the circular contours is a contour map of the noise. The white line on the outside is 30 decibels, and then 35, and then 40, then 45. And according to our peer reviews, each contour should be increased by at least 5 decibels. The tilt one is similar. We didn't get a peer review done on that one, but you can see Coolah to the west here. You know, if those contours are increased by 5 decibels, you would find possibly that the 30-35 decibel contour takes in the township of Coolah, whereas at the moment, with their methodology, just by coincidence, Coolah is outside the noise contour. And sorry, it's quite confusing, obviously. There's a lot of data in these EISs. There are 3 or 4 ring binder folders if you want to print them out. The guts of the report is all hidden in appendices, all the technical data, and then you've got to get the data out of the right section and look at it, and then you've got to understand the jargon and try and make sense of it. So it's a big job to read this stuff and pick out the information that you want to find and make sense of it. And then you get maps like this, which, you know, a lot of people just switch off as soon as they see that. And the way they number the houses or the dwellings isn't consistent. So again, finding your dwelling and identifying who's what is difficult. They wash out the background, like the roads and things, and they don't show the town. We've had maps presented to us that don't even have Coolah on them. And in this day and age, with the ability to overlay maps on Google Maps and various things like that, you wouldn't think it was possible for them to produce such terrible maps that don't give you, that aren't easy to use. Neighbour agreements. So if you're not a host, but you're a neighbour, they will come and bother you, and they want you to sign a neighbour agreement. And that means that they'll give you some money for every year for so many years or something, just for the inconvenience of having construction and various things around. The trouble is they're very open-ended and they're very ill-defined. And what other people near other projects have said, most of them we've spoken to, I guess, which are in the negative, is that they wish they never signed anything. because you basically waive all your legal rights once you've signed it, and the project can change later, like the tilt modification, and you've got no recourse. You know, you've already signed a neighbour agreement. So then they change the project, they change the power line routing or something, and you can't really do anything. You've got you've signed up, you've given away your rights. And it's also cheap insurance for them because it also circumvents future litigation. So you need deep pockets and you know, spend a lot of time and money and effort to fight it, especially if you've signed a neighbourhood agreement, a neighbour agreement. We've had hosts we've spoken to here now with the modification that aren't happy with the changes, and they weren't happy when they decided they wanted to push power lines into different locations. So even the hosts, they've signed up, they thought they were getting A, and now they're getting sold B or C, and they're not very happy about that. Other problems, if you've ever been up here, as I said, we're on the Great Dividing Range. It's all black soil, black clay type soils. It erodes like crazy. The tilt project, the modification estimates there'll be 270 kilometres of access roads and assembly areas where they assemble the turbines. They've got to cut out a huge base for the cement base of the turbines. The erosion is going to be massive. I mean, they're steep, black hills that are heavily eroded already, and all this earthwork is going to cause more erosion if you get a storm at the wrong time. Loss of ag production during construction, you've got the immediate interference. And then the decommissioning costs. The coal mines are required to lodge money like a bond with the government. There's legislation requiring them to do that. There's no such legislation for wind or solar. So that's another thing that needs to be pushed, that they need to have a bond type system in place to decommission and rehabilitate the land after these projects are finished, and they've only got a relatively short life of 20 to 30 years. And at this stage, rehabilitation is the responsibility of the landowner. So if the company goes bankrupt or disappears, the landowner is left legally with the responsibility at the moment. The whole scheme, inefficient use of resources, it's all meant to be renewable, it's all meant to be for the good of the planet. But wind and solar, the experience in Australia and elsewhere is it only gets 30% utilisation. So you install 1,000 megawatt, it'll only deliver on average 300 megawatt to the grid. But all the infrastructure, like the power lines, has to be sized to carry 1,000 megawatt, whether it's being utilised or not. Intermittent supply and mismatch with demand, that's coming out of England. It's already known here. I mean, it was 22 years ago the first wind farm started operating here. So we're not ignorant to this anymore. We know the shortcomings. We know the problems, and that's why they're talking about backing it up with batteries or pumped hydro. And at the moment, they're backing it up with coal or gas. The lifespan I mentioned, and all the power infrastructure, it all needs to be built, but rather than having a concentrated power source like a thermal power station, and then all the power lines fan out from there like a spider's web, you've now got all this distributed power production, and then it's all got to be brought back in to a central load or city. So everything has to be built back to front from what we've built so far. So it's all got to be rebuilt at huge cost in money and a huge cost in resources, as in steel and iron, and you know, it's just, I couldn't think of a more inefficient way of doing something, but that's what they're planning to do. As I say, we've got that experience now, so why do we keep doing stupid stuff if we already know it's not going to do the job? I can't see the rest of my slide. I can't remember what it was about now. I think it's about the amount of resources used to produce that stuff. From the International Energy Agency, somebody did a study on how much extra material is used to construct these projects. And what I see is, also there's the financial side. I don't think it's about producing power. I don't think producing power is the objective. The prime objective is just financial activity, financial churn with little electricity production, financial speculation on the national electricity market. We've seen that already with the water market when they set that up in New South Wales in the 90s. The speculators go in and basically buy up the water licenses and then sell them back to the users at inflated prices. And it's just a financial, market. It's not about providing water, and this is the same. It's not about providing electricity. The Transgrid AMO power infrastructure a few years ago, there was a report where they were overbuilding infrastructure because they were getting government grants or tax breaks based upon the value of the infrastructure, even though it wasn't actually needed. They were gold plating the infrastructure. And Senate estimates for 2014-15, at that point, from the renewable energy certificates, they were getting 500,000 to 700,000 per turbine per year in subsidies. And that's whether it produces any power or not. So it can sit there idle and they're still getting that subsidy each year. And that explains why they want to stick so many turbines on a hill or in every project area, because the subsidies are based on the installed capacity, not the power produced. And they've changed the system. I think that estimates committee stirred a hornet's nest up a bit, so they changed the scheme after that. But there's still data now, but it's harder to find, saying that they're still being subsidised huge amount. And at the end of the day, we all pay for that, either with our power bills or as a taxpayer, or our kids are liable for it, for the debt in the future. So it's a lose-lose for us. The only people that win are the overseas financial institutions that buy into this stuff. And this is from the Financial Review 2017. 2.8 billion a year up to 2030. If you just Google it, it comes up with over 500,000 every year for each turbine. I don't know where Google based that, but there you go. And the other problem with it is all the materials are imported. I mean, they're all made overseas. We don't make any turbines here. There's no skilled manufacturing jobs here. Denmark's an interesting case study. They were one of the first in Europe to install wind turbines, and they actually set up an industry manufacturing turbines. And 60% of the turbines installed in Australia are from Denmark. And they're also one of the first to stop installing turbines in Europe. But you don't hear about that. But they've maintained the industry to keep selling turbines to everyone else. But they're actually decommissioning turbines in Denmark now. Transmission towers, you can go onto Alibaba and wherever, and you can find, once they design them, they can just buy them flat pack out of China as well. And we mine all this stuff here and export it, but for some reason we deny the use of those resources here ourselves. I mean, how can you dig up coal, export it, burn it overseas, and re-import the material and then claim that you're doing renewable stuff? I mean, if CO2 is the problem, we're still producing CO2. It's just happening somewhere else. And you compare it to thermal power. Uarbray Power Station, which is due to close in the next several years, I think, is almost 3,000 megawatt, and it can do that 24/7, except when it's doing under maintenance. They shut one turbine down at a time. And Tilt and Nason together are 2,200 megawatt installed, and typically we'll only get 30% utilisation of that, and probably at the wrong time. It will still need to be backed up by thermal power somehow. And this is the sort of turbine we're looking at. This is a Vestas 6.2 kilowatt 162 turbine, made in Denmark. And then the materials in these things, there's 260 litres of hydraulic oil. So that's bigger than a 44. 300 litres of lubricating oil. So again, that's 1.5 44-gallon drums. It's got a 2 kilowatt oil heater in it that needs powering the whole time. So these things are consuming power while they sit there to keep the oil warm, because if the wind starts to blow, they've got to be able to get up to speed and start producing power straight away. There's no warm-up time. The steel tower, there's 335 tons of steel in each tower. They've got a radiator system to cool the oil, so there's water glycol cooling for the oil. there's 2,200 tons of sand, aggregate, and concrete in the base of each turbine, and that stays there forever. It will never be removed. That's a base being constructed. That isn't a 6 kilowatt base. That's something smaller. But yeah, there's 1,000 cubic meters of concrete at 2.2 tons per cubic meter. It's massive. So they cut into the ground and they build these gravity type bases and then mount the mast on top of that. And when they're finished, if they take the mast and the turbine away, they'll just push some dirt back over the top. That's a larger one. That could be a 6 kilowatt one. 220 of these, plus 148 of them. That's just massive. Another problem that we've identified out here and for anywhere after the bushfires of 2019 down the coastal regions, you're very aware of it. Aerial bushfire fighting severely hampered by the location presence of the turbines. For us, aerial agricultural ops are severely restricted as well. And there's also a light aviation hazard. You can see by the photos, the turbines aren't very visible with clouds behind. The turbines are white and they're 250 meters tall. So, light aircraft in poor weather below cloud, trying to make it into Coolah Airport or into a neighbouring strip here, the turbines themselves are a real hazard. And the proponents don't want to put lights on them, which is the CASA requirement. But they don't want to put lights on them because the other problem then they have is that obviously they're more visible at night and people complain about the flashing red lights. There's also turbulence downstream of them when the wind's blowing, and that's not defined how heavy that turbulence is. They just left it very vague. But again, for light aircraft flying downwind of these things, it is a hazard. We had a surviving bushfire out here in 2017. It burnt 55,000 hectares, and I was out fighting that on a local truck with the RFS, and they had the large aerial tanker and the small tankers fighting it there. They had a C-130 dropping retardant, and he was well below 250 meters or 900 feet. So for accuracy and to get the retardant where you want it, you need to drop from as low as you possibly can. So recently, Tilt and Energy Co and ACEN have come out and said, large air tankers can drop from above 250 meters, so it won't inhibit firefighting. Well, it's false. They can drop from any height if they want to, but if you want it to be effective and accurate, they need to get as low as possible over the fire front. So it is going to impede firefighting. The other thing they say is all the interior roads in the project site and cleared areas will make good fire breaks, and the access for firefighting on the ground will be better. And that's true also, but you've got to remember the RFS in rural areas is made up of landowners or neighbours. And so if there's a fire on host land, you're going to have non-host neighbours have to drop what they're doing and go and fight that fire on host land, being denied the use of aerial firefighting or effective use because we don't want it coming out onto our land. So again, it's inequitable that the non-hosts have to be inconvenienced or possibly put their lives at risk fighting a fire in an area that they disagreed with the building of it in the first place and recommended that it shouldn't be built in the first place. And down the coast, you would have seen the air tankers working. It's now a primary means of fighting fire. If you lose that capability, you lose a lot of capability in stopping those fires. Small air tankers wouldn't go amongst. They say they can turn the turbines off and you can fly between the turbines. I can't think of any employer that would put their pilot into that sort of environment. You couldn't ask anyone to do it for workplace safety reasons. So that is just disingenuous. Helicopters, they might be able to work around them in the confined spaces better. But in all these cases, you've got to remember that you're going to have smoke, poor visibility, and turbulence. So again, I doubt very much whether any sensible pilot is going to go in amongst the wind farms to fight a fire. But this is what they're spruiking at the moment, which is just wrong. I mean, not just an engineer. I was in the Air Force. I flew C-130s and I flew low-level operations forward air control for 12 years. So I know aviation and I know what I'm talking about, but they just glibly discard this stuff as being not an issue. Biodiversity, they just accept the eagle and hawk mortality. They quantify it. I can't remember the numbers, but they accept that as a cost of doing business. And other species in the Tilt project identified as high risk are the barking owl, large bent-winged bat, powerful owl, region honeyeater, swift parrot, and white-throated needletail. They identify them, but they don't say what they're going to do to protect them necessarily. Except there is, I can't remember which one it is, but what I said before we started, it was they then offset any biodiversity problems or environmental problems by asking adjoining landholders or other people with similar landscapes to protect their habitat. So once again, all the inconvenience is pushed onto the non-hosts, while the hosts sort of get away with it. It just seems a funny way of thinking. So the 2017 fire we had, there's been a lot of recovery. It was all burnt out, but we've got a lot of regrowth, a lot of suckers, and the access road into that wind farm is going to have to be clear a lot of that regrowth again. So it's going to set back the recovery years. And the tilt modification, 85% of the additional ground, because they've expanded the footprint outside the original approved project, is native vegetation and critically endangered box gum woodland. And the impact to the critically endangered woodland is 2.1 times greater than the original consent. So they've both got about 400 hectares of this endangered woodland within their project sites that they're going to knock over. And they want you to offset it somewhere else. Biosecurity is a hot topic for everybody these days, and also for us with stock. We've been dealing with it for years. At the moment, we're all mandated. We've got to have a biosecurity plan for our properties, and things you can do is restrict traffic, and any people visiting your property, like an agent or tradesman or something, supposedly, you leave their vehicle at the front gate. They go on your vehicle on your property so that they don't spread any weeds or seeds on their vehicle on your country or any other disease. Washing down vehicles, if you can't do that before they come and go, that's going to be impossible. They're talking about thousands of movements a day when they start building these things, and the easement and access agreements that you sign don't hold them to doing this stuff. If you've got a smart lawyer and you want to put it in there, you can, but I very much doubt it'll be effectively enforced. I can't see how they could effectively enforce these things. So biosecurity is a problem for us. So talking about traffic, the village of Uarbray has less than 10, it's a small town, 10 movements a day at this stage. The streets are dirt, and they want to increase that to over 400 a day with tradesmen and vehicles. And they also want to bring all the turbines in through there for the Gurgalang cluster. And these blades are 90 metres long. So they're going to have to, the people that live down there are going to be just covered in dust. The workers' construction camp, where they've got it sited at the moment, is prone to erosion, and it's another difficult problem. All the turbines will be trucked from the port of Newcastle along the Golden Highway to Uarbray. And if you've driven that road, you already know that it's not in very good condition. Muswellbrook Shire, Warrumbungle Shire, Upper Hunter Shire have all identified and put in opposing reports saying that it's just not sustainable for them to take all these turbines and heavy wide loads, and then for the foreseeable future, the growth in these projects, they just say the current roads, it just can't do it. Something has to give. And they talk about, we can't assess each project alone. You've got to look at the cumulative impact of all this transport and all this additional traffic. Social impacts elsewhere, it's always been a boom then bust during construction and then operation. A lot of the labour, or most of it, it isn't local labour. It's all contractors from outside. They come in, they live in a in a demountable camp somewhere, and then they build these things for 2 or 3 years and then they leave. There's virtually no local permanent employment, and it isn't skilled employment. There's no trade jobs, there's no professional jobs, there's no manufacturing. As I said, we import all this stuff, and I term it the cargo cult mentality. Everything's flown in from elsewhere rather than building things self-sufficiently with local expertise. So then we got on to make a submission. And as we had a cobra coal mine was proposed out here, about 60 kilometres away, by the state government. They bought up all this farmland from farmers, compulsory acquired it, and we're going to start a coal mine to guarantee cheap coal to the power stations that they were going to sell off. This is all in the Eddie Obeid era. And in the end, they never built it. They bought thousands of hectares and they never built it. And 3 or 4 years ago, they auctioned the land back to, farmers and other people that bought the land back. So don't assume it's a done deal. Things can change. And then we had the address for the planning portal and the dates. So, we make a point of making a submission. You've got to get to the portal. You've got to write a submission. It doesn't need to be long. It doesn't need to be detailed, but just tell it like it is. What is your problem with the project? What don't you like about it? If you can find the time to go through the environmental impact study or the other documentation they want you to comment on, well, do so. But it's very, you got to get way deep into that, and it does take time. Hopefully some people will do it, and then you got to get to the portal. You got to set up an account. Don't leave it to the last minute. That's about where we finished.
How was the community? That was incredibly thorough, and you've looked at so many elements. That was fantastic, Grant. That was awesome. Like, it's really, really good. You're giving a really big overall picture of all the implications of every aspect, including environmental. So thank you for that. How was the community at the end of, what was the feeling in the room?
Stunned and gobsmacked, I suppose. They didn't know. I mean, it was just that sort of response we sort of get, is that they were just stunned that this tilt project has been running for decades now on the horizon, and they were stunned at how little they actually knew about it. Like, we tried to highlight all the things that they willfully don't tell you, the things that people want to know. Am I going to see them? What do they look like? How big are they? Am I going to hear them? All these things. But that's what they don't tell you. They waffle on, but they don't tell you what people want. What's my land value going? What's going to happen to my land value? They can't tell you. They won't tell you. So we just wanted to get the facts out there. Most of that stuff, 95% of it, came out of their own paperwork, out of their own reports. It's indisputable, but they just don't highlight it.
Yeah. And what was the mayor's response?
Yeah, Warramungal Shire had put in an opposing submission. Their main, what we gather was, they sort of phrase it that they want a better deal. They want money for roads or for waste disposal, or those are a given. They need those things as they see it before they could even contemplate hosting something like this. But I think given the response of the people and having seen the presentation, I think they also went away and the sounds were positive, that they knew the mood of the people, that we weren't happy with it and we didn't want to get swamped by it. But what that means, I'm not really sure. Say, because it's a state significant development, the council's effectively sidelined. They have no say. So, if you want to build a garden shed or change your front fence or something in town, you've got to go get a DA through council. They can put 250-metre turbines on my boundary and they don't have to ask me. And they don't have to ask council. It's ridiculous, absolutely crazy.
Is there a process where they can come in and put them on your land even if you don't want them?
No, not turbines or solar panels, because they're private. Well, because they're private companies, the generators, as they call them, no. But the solar farms that I've heard of so far, they either buy the land off you or they lease the land from you, and they're looking at a minimum of 400 odd hectares at a time to make it viable for the solar, which is 1,000 acres, so it's not a small amount of ground that they want. The power lines, that's a different issue, because traditionally coming from a where we had state infrastructure and we had government authorities that used to build and operate this stuff, the general public and my generation and older generally think that it's all publicly owned, it's for the public good, and therefore so yes, they still have the legal clout to come in and say, we're going to put it here, get out of the way. There is legislation, I can't remember the act, but there is compensation legislation for easements and power lines that's fairly well established. They pay you an amount per hectare or what have you, and a one-off payment, but there's no annual payment. So we're used to statutory bodies doing these things for power lines and things like that. But things have changed. I mean, we've sold all our assets off. We've sold the power lines off. Transgrid, for example, is 70% owned by Saudis, 20% owned by Canadian, and the rest is somebody else. Even AEMO is sort of like a private company now. It's not publicly owned, so people assume it's a public company, it's for the public good, but those days are gone. These are all profit-making organizations who are trying to do everything at minimum cost, and what they're offering to the hosts is really chicken feed compared to what they're getting in subsidies and what they're making on the market. So if you can't shut them down completely if you don't want them, I mean, I think you've got to change your mindset and go into this with, I mean, this is a fallback option, but it's just realize that you're in a transaction. This is a commercial transactional environment. So you are negotiating for the best deal that you can possibly get. And so are they. It's not a mutual benefit. It's not a win-win.
No, but it's painted as a win-win. BlackRock has just bought the rights, or have been given, given the rights to create a battery in the Central Coast, one of the Southern Hemisphere's largest battery. And I didn't know that our iron ore, because iron ore is what lithium comes from, isn't it, for the batteries?
Yeah, I'm not sure where the percentages are.
Yeah. I didn't know our iron ore was exported and not used. So again, there's a whole nother, where is the iron ore coming from? Where's the lithium coming from for these batteries? Just with, you've said a lot, so I won't keep you much longer, but with the community consultation aspect, so from my sounds of it and what I'm gathering, what you're saying and what you have, implied, there just was no real on the ground community consultation from Energy Co prior to the lead up to your area being declared a res?
I don't know of any consultation prior to the res being announced. Okay. Maybe others do, but I haven't come across them yet. Yeah. Council hasn't said anything about it. But no, it just seemed like if you go back, and I can't remember where it is now, but if you go back into some of these like think tank type consultancies, international consultant companies, and those sorts of organizations, you can find discussion or proposals like this back 10 or 15 years ago. I can't remember where I saw it recently. And so it's like all these planning things. Somebody thought up, maybe we could do this, and they float it to government, but it takes a while before maybe they jump on board with it. But yeah, I don't know. As far as the government goes, no one in government spoke to anyone out here, as far as I know, about the res before they announced it.
And that would have been really easy to do out there, because you've got a small amount of people out there. So it would be really easy to make sure that people were aware about it, where it might be, they can justify non-awareness in a larger area. Like, no, not many people know that we're about to, we're in a res consultation process, or we're in a 6 mega city consultation process. Yes. Hardly anyone knows. But out there, there's just absolutely no excuse for the farmers not to be aware.
You know, you're right. But this shows, and we said that at the meeting. I mean, after several years of consultation, nobody knew anything. And I mean, not everyone's paying attention, and we weren't exactly either, so I understand that. But what they call consultation wasn't telling people what they wanted to know. Like, they do have community meetings and they have information sessions, and they go in and they got glossy brochures and posters on the wall and bad maps, you know, and that's what they do. And then if you ask them a question, go, oh, where's the power line going to go? You know, they'll have a broad hashed in area. It might go somewhere here. They won't be able to tell you where it's going on your property. Or, oh, what's the payment scheme then? If you come across my property, what do you do? They can't give you an exact answer. Or if I host a wind turbine on my property, how much do I get paid per turbine? Oh, well, that's confidential. We can't tell you. You know, so one neighbour doesn't know what the other neighbour's getting. You know, they could sign up to different deals. Energy Co, because we defeated Transgrid, the Transgrid corridor, and Energy Co stepped into the breach. They've been playing catch up the whole time out here, and they still are. And their consultation has been all over the place, and they keep changing their story. They're going to put the power lines here, and then that gets pushed back and changed. Oh, we're going to put them over here now. And then, you know, that's all in play at the moment. And that's what we're going through with them right now, is trying to negotiate to not have them on our property. They do consult, but they don't really consult. And then they will set up a shop front probably somewhere, and they'll have their plans on display, and you can wander in there and have a look in your own time. And the other thing, why don't we know about it? And you know, given the last 3 years, I mean, you know, they can sell anything, and if they bang on about it 24/7 on every news bulletin, every show in between, you will know about it. But they don't do that with these projects. They don't, as I say, they don't tell you that there's a mega city planned or something. But if they wanted to, I'm sure they could tell you, but they don't. You know.
Yeah. And so just with, what are the host farms, the farms that are taking and becoming host, will they still have their cattle on the farms around the wind turbines?
Well, that's what they're told they can, yes, or stock. I mean, obviously it's going to impede farming if you actually, you know, driving machinery and stuff. You're going to lose some territory. They say that you can farm around them. We're hearing various things, and I haven't dug right into it yet. But the latest thing to come out is the blades. They're made from fiberglass composites, graphite and epoxy, and a component of epoxy, bisphenol A, there's quite a bit written on it. It's a endocrine disabler, and the blades erode. And so all this dust off the blades, this epoxy dust, is spread downwind, and the permitted amount per, you know, milligrams per whatever is quite low. So if it gets into the water supply or spread all over the ground in a certain quantity, you'll start to inhibit livestock's endocrine and ourselves, which you then have health problems, breeding problems. And talking to other groups around the country, it seems, again, most hosts, land hosts, don't end up living on their property, or not for long. They either already made plans to move, or they live there for a bit and then they move. So from experience, it seems to be that they're not very not very good to live by.
That
for whatever reason.
And are those health consequences in any of the documents that you came across?
No, not at all.
They don't talk about that at all.
Don't mention it at all. No.
So what's next steps? You've got your submissions in. I saw all of those. I went and had a look, and there's just no, refute. I can't remember the language, but just, you know, pages and pages of your community coming together and refuting that, you know, this can go on. And how long have they got before they've got to come back to you?
Look, we don't know. I think, look, the ACEN EIS was meant to be, or I think it was September, it was meant to go to the IPC in September, which is obviously gone now, because of the number of submissions. we heard that was pushed back to November, but then I've also heard that that's going to be pushed back further, I think, because they can't actually get through the number of submissions and and answer them adequately. And DPE actually did issue a bit of a blast to them saying you've really got to get your shop in order and answer these questions. And the Tilt one with 160 odd submissions, that's going, I don't know what date that's going to be assessed now at all. Energy Co, there's nothing formal out at the moment that we have to reply to with them, because they're still trying to, they don't know what they're doing really, they're still up in the air, but the pressure is on them to try and nail down the route for these power lines from the wind farms to Marothery, I think, last week or this week, because they wanted to get that nailed down before Christmas, because after Christmas the government goes into caretaker mode effectively, and the government, the pressure was on to try and get it sorted before then, but that's not going to happen now, which we're happy about. So, to be honest, we're just trying to push it out so that we've delayed it hopefully till after the election, and then we'll see what happens then.
Okay.
Hopefully nothing will happen through the caretaker period.
Yeah. Okay. And your so if you all hadn't got active, it was only a handful of you, wasn't it, that got active, and your wife was telling me, and did letterbox drops and got those graphics organized and went around town and talked about it. If you hadn't done that, nothing would have probably come to light, and people would still be quite, not really understanding. You wouldn't have had those submissions in. Is that your sense?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Tilt project was approved in 2018 with no submissions, zero apparently.
Yeah.
And we weren't. I mean, we didn't start this going to fight Tilt. I mean, we didn't start with that. We sort of, it was approved. We thought, well, it's just going to go ahead. It's been running for decades, and most local people, town and country, were accepting of that, I think, because they thought that was it. But then when we found out there was this other one next door which was going to affect us more closely, and we looked at it, we said, well, that's no good. We don't want that. And then when you look at them together, and then with the Energy Co transmission stuff over the top, and then you realize there's a res, it just snowballed into something that it's just ridiculous. You can't pack all this stuff into one small community like this. It's just not right. It's just, it's going to destroy the countryside. It's going to destroy production, and we're talking about food security all the time now, and all this carry on, and this is doing nothing for food security.
No, it's
destroying farmland.
It is destroying farmland. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. We'll stay in touch, because it sounds like you're already connected in with other areas that are res, and I'll stay connected as well, because I think we need that bigger picture. Like not everyone trying to work out what's going on in a silo. So I just really appreciate all the work you've done, and so thankful that we connected up through your lovely wife. So yeah, we'll be back in touch. But thank you so much for your time, Grant.
No problem. Thank you.